But having worked with the Dutch, I mean, for many, many, many years, they have, and particularly with my offshore previous career, their engineering is sublime when it comes to oil field support and subsea engineering.
Water control in general, they are the leaders in the world.
Absolutely, they are.
And have been contracted as such in various places in the United States.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I've worked on Dutch vessels in the Gulf of Mexico many, many times.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Was this part of a penal colony outsourcing project? How did you end up out there? Or should I say, how did you make it back? How did you make it back? Did you have to elude the guards, like James Bond style, to make it back?
It was. Oh, Mike! I think I've just been bested.
I think so, Simon. This is a first.
Or in our case, we would call it worsted.
Worsted.
I mean, we lob, we're lobbing small artillery back and forth at each other, and every now and then you might get a little hit to jar somebody, and he drops
straight at it.
The mother of all bombs, just.
But and the thing that we would say, and this is on a massive vessel, and every now and again there would be a Dutchman on his Dutch vessel, and you could hear them coming, clip clop, clip clop, clip clop, clip clop.
That's not funny. Keep going.
He'd be wearing his wooden clogs,
Of course.
on a ship,
Of course.
as a Dutchman.
Right. And I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't make fun of those.
Well, I'm about to.
This might hurt.
Well, it's going to be ruthless, because the comment that we use when you hear this clip clop, it's wooden shoes, wouldn't listen.
I'm not having it. I'm not listening to that. Can't hear it. Gonna edit that out.
I'm sure you are.
That hurts.
It's ruthless. I mean, we take no prisoners on this show.
I appreciate that. While the clip clopping is getting farther away as they leave you, what they're saying is that proves it. If you're not Dutch,
You ain't much. That's the other one. If you ain't Dutch, you ain't much. And you know what? As much you got to sit there and just, oh bloody hell, I've got to take this shit again. And but you had to admire the engineering.
Oh, there's no question about that.
Within the project that they were doing, and they are undoubtedly.
And for the benefit of any of your listeners who are of German extraction, it can fairly be said that Dutch engineering is second to none in the world.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah,
I'd agree with that. Yeah, I've worked enough with them. I mean, there is an element of arrogance behind it, and I used to make some shocking jokes with the Dutch, and get away with it. Most of the time because we were all legless in Rotterdam. So that levels the playing field significantly, I may add.
of course. As everyone is in Rotterdam.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, I've got a great respect for the Dutch and their seafaring history and their subsea engineering. It is, without question, the best in the world.
Yeah. Well, out of necessity.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
Being the mother of all invention.
Exactly.
Right.
So there's a
huge proportion of the country is underwater right now.
Exactly. I tip my hat to your Dutch
ancestors. Most of the engineering work that my family did in the United States was in what we call sanitation engineering. My family was in garbage.
I was about to say there was another punchline. I'm just on the tip of my tongue.
No, it can't get any worse than reality.
Number one in the number two business.
Number one is a number two business, and number two is the number one business.
Roger that.
Yep. My family was in garbage since the turn of the century, the previous century. For the youngsters in the audience, that's 123 years ago.
For goodness sake.
Yeah. My grandfather's father, my grandfather. My dad turned down a chance to run the garbage business.
That's big money.
Much to my disappointment.
Big money too.
Oh, absolutely. And commercial garbage? Oh, tremendous.
And what city was this in?
Chicago.
Oh, yeah. And then,
I was about to say, until the Mafia may have got...
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well, interestingly, it was a violent time, but remember, just in the same sense that when the federal government of the United States regulates businesses, you limit competition, it drives up the profitability.
The margin gets bigger.
Right. So when the mafia, and most of the mafia in those days wasn't mafia, it was, Dutch families. But when a combination of Dutch family control, this is back in the pre-Wayne Huizinga days. My aunt, by the way, used to babysit Wayne Huizinga. That's how far back we're going.
I'm going to watch my P's and Q's from now on in, let me tell you.
When the Dutch families and eventually Italian families were in the business, the Italian families are mostly in the business in New York, not Chicago, but when that was a time when families would control who had what territory, it would eliminate competition and would drive up profitability. And you see that in industries that are regulated by the U.S. federal government as well.
Well,
which is why some of them don't complain.
And at that point, it's a monopoly and you're writing your own check. So I get that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And people will pay good money to have their garbage pulled away.
Absolutely, they will.
Yeah.
Because when it's left honking on the sidewalk, that's no good for anyone's business.
No, it's a bad day. So Chicago was all Dutch garbage, very small companies, and they were consolidated. Huizinga's father, actually, began the consolidation. Eventually Waste Management Inc. eventually consolidated all of Chicago, and then, of course, New York, and spread nationwide, and that was how Waste Management Inc. became one of the biggest companies in the world.
Big money in waste. In fact, you know what? When you control a monopoly, there's big money in everything.
There's big money in anything. That is
exactly
right.
Yeah.
And entrepreneurship is the way to not only profitability but innovation, and those things are inextricably linked, even in garbage.
Well, and that's where we're all lacking in today's public education system. Is we should be creating critical thinkers that then become entrepreneurs. And as soon as you've got entrepreneurs, guess what? You've got a thriving economy. Entrepreneurs make a thriving economy. So to stifle critical thinking, you're opening a horrible door to failure.
There's no question about it. Ironically, I think that our public school system is set up to educate children in a way that makes them more, and I choose my words carefully, docile, rather than disruptive.
Touché. Just a little bit of French.
And here's to touching you too. What we really need is to teach the kids to be more disruptive. And in that sense, I think it's also ironic, not only that we educate them incorrectly, but the school system is set up incorrectly in trying to be impervious to disruption itself by not allowing private schools to compete on a level playing field.
One of the worst pieces of legislation was No Child Left Behind.
Absolutely. I wish the legislation had been left behind.
Exactly. I mean, as far as I'm concerned,
no state was left behind by the federal government imposing no child to be left behind.
And therein lies the problem. What is the federal government doing, even with its grubby little fingers, on education?
The answer to that is violating the 10th Amendment of the Constitution.
There you go.
The Department of Education should not exist. Should not have existed.
Absolutely not.
And consider, and I'm sorry, we don't have to talk about politics if you don't want to, or policy, and it'd be fine with me, but consider that if any other citizen in either the United States or any other backwater nation in, for example, Europe, which is redundant, were to bribe a state in order to conduct certain policy, you would consider that a felony.
Absolutely. And this is what they're doing with the carrot and stick. We've said this on the show countless times. The carrot and stick policy of federal government it's absolutely corrupt.
And ruthless.
Yeah.
Inescapable.
Yeah, you can't get around it, apart from getting states' rights back, which, as Spike Cohen very delicately presented it to me, I am now a born-again libertarian. And that was funny how he pointed that out, but it was a good setup. And I've been so disappointed with the two tiers of the democratic and republican system. It clearly is failed, And it's almost failed from inception if you want to figure out where the root cause goes back. You know, I mean, has it ever really worked, a two-party system? I suspect it probably hasn't.
Well, when it wasn't so ingrained, and when people got their news sources from the same place, which is almost never, as you probably know in American history, much of our news was always coming from different sources, local newspapers, for example.
Well, they had integrity.
When they had integrity, they devoted their integrity to either one party or the other for a better part of a century. But certainly since the advent of cable news, we have given up on the idea of anybody getting their news from the same source, right? You get your news from a Republican source or a Democratic source. And in this sense, I believe it was a major contributor to the dawning of a new authoritarian age, where each party has left behind what used to be their policy agenda. You know, you don't see the Democratic Party, for example, any longer being in any real sense anti-war. They're not really in any modern sense socially liberal, even the extent to which they go around beating each other into agreeing with each other or get canceled, right? And you don't really see the Republican Party any longer maintaining a position that you would characterize as fiscally conservative any longer.
No, absolutely not.
No.
I mean, and here you've just raised two very, very clear points of the two-party system failing the American citizen 100%.
100%. Each one has adopted as its primary objective keeping the other side out of power. And we know from history, mostly outside the United States, up until now, we know from history that this is where authoritarianism comes from. It comes from a politician trying to convince you, and eventually successfully convincing much of the population, that what you have to fear is not the loss of your civil liberties, but that other idiot coming to power, and therefore I need more power to protect you.
That's very beautifully put, by the way. Is that not totalitarianism?
It's definitely the road to totalitarianism.
Because that's where I think we're at. I mean, we're in a position that describes what we are feeling, and don't think that the American public isn't feeling this.
The American public feels it, and I would argue doesn't quite recognize what it is that they feel.
Well, there's so much apathy involved, but don't underestimate the American public for not seeing the underlying tones of totalitarianism